continues deteriorating with each passing hour. The breakfast ordeal looms ahead like an insurmountable mountain. Margaret must appear at the table at 8 o'clock sharp, looking fresh and capable of managing another day's domestic responsibilities. She must make conversation with Charles about his banking concerns while participating in the children's morning routines. Most challenging of all, she must accomplish these social requirements while battling physical symptoms that make basic concentration nearly impossible. The staircase becomes an exercise in controlled terror as Margaret grips the banister with desperate intensity, each step downward requiring conscious coordination of movements that once flowed automatically. The grandfather clock's ticking seems amplified beyond normal volume, each second marking another moment closer to inevitable exposure. Charles sits at his usual place, absorbed in financial newspapers that detail railway investments and colonial developments. His morning routine proceeds with comfortable predictability that assumes his wife's continued participation in their established domestic patterns. He expects her to pour his coffee, discuss the day's social obligations, and provide the kind of pleasant morning conversation that has characterized their marriage for 8 years. Edmund and Charlotte chatter about their lessons and playground adventures with the unconscious cruelty of children who assume adult stability will always be available to support their emotional needs. They require maternal attention, guidance for daily challenges, and the kind of nurturing presence that has defined Margaret's identity as devoted mother. But the woman attempting to fulfill these expectations feels like an imposter wearing Margaret's clothes while lacking any of her capabilities. Every gesture requires enormous conscious effort. Each word must be carefully considered before speaking to prevent the slurring that accompanies her current condition. Most exhausting of all, she must maintain the appearance of interested engagement while internally focusing all her energy on preventing complete physical collapse. "You seem rather quiet this morning, my dear," Charles observes without looking up from his newspaper. "I trust you're not developing the influenza that Mrs. Pemberton mentioned at dinner last evening." The casual comment feels like a trap designed to test Margaret's ability to maintain her deception. Charles possesses no medical training, but 8 years of marriage have given him intimate knowledge of his wife's normal patterns and behaviors. Any significant deviation from established routines will attract the kind of attention that could lead to discoveries Margaret cannot survive. "Perhaps a touch of fatigue from yesterday's entertaining," she replies, proud that her voice emerges without obvious tremor, despite the tremendous effort required for speech control. Nothing that won't resolve with proper rest and moderate activity. The response satisfies Charles's mild concern, while deflecting any suggestion of serious illness that might require medical intervention. But Margaret understands that her window for maintaining this explanation grows smaller with each passing hour, as withdrawal symptoms intensify beyond her ability to disguise them through willpower and careful performance. Edmund spills marmalade on his school clothes, creating the kind of minor domestic crisis that normally would be resolved through calm maternal efficiency. But Margaret's compromised condition makes even simple problem-solving feel overwhelming. The sticky mess seems to spread with deliberate malice, while her shaking hands prove incapable of effective cleanup efforts. Charlotte notices her mother's unusual clumsiness with the sharp observation skills that children possess for detecting adult distress. Her questioning expression reveals awareness that something fundamental has changed in their family's morning dynamics, though she lacks the vocabulary to articulate her concerns. "Mama, are you feeling poorly?" Charlotte asks, with innocent directness that cuts through Margaret's carefully constructed facade. "You look rather pale, and your hands are shaking like grandmother's did when she was unwell." The comparison to Charles's elderly mother, who suffered from palsy during her final years, creates exactly the kind of medical speculation that Margaret desperately wants to avoid. Children's observations carry particular weight, because their lack of social sophistication prevents them from accepting polite explanations that adults might find satisfactory. "Just a bit tired, darling," Margaret manages, while attempting to steady her trembling hands through conscious effort that proves frustratingly ineffective. "Perhaps I'll rest after you and Edmund depart for your lessons." But rest offers no solution to Margaret's crisis, because her condition results from chemical absence rather than simple exhaustion. Sleep cannot provide the relief her body craves, and lying quietly in her bedroom will only intensify her awareness of symptoms that grow worse. With each passing hour, Mrs. Caldwell appears with the day's household agenda, expecting to receive clear instructions about meal planning, staff assignments, and preparation for tomorrow's social obligations. Her efficient competence assumes that Margaret will provide the kind of decisive leadership that has characterized their working relationship for over a decade. The housekeeper's detailed questions about menu selections and marketing budgets require cognitive processing that Margaret's compromised mental state cannot adequately provide. Simple decisions about which vegetables to serve with tomorrow's roast become overwhelming challenges that demand more mental energy than she possesses. Perhaps we should postpone the Ashfords' dinner invitation until next week, Mrs. Caldwell suggests tactfully, after observing Margaret's unusual hesitation about routine household decisions. You seem rather overwhelmed with recent social obligations. The observation contains enough truth to feel simultaneously helpful and threatening. Margaret desperately needs relief from upcoming social commitments that will require sustained performance beyond her current capabilities. But accepting such relief means acknowledging that something fundamental has changed in her ability to manage normal domestic responsibilities. Yes, that seems wise, Margaret agrees, recognizing that she has no choice but to begin cancelling obligations that assume capabilities she no longer possesses. Please send my regrets with appropriate explanations about temporary indisposition. The phrase, temporary indisposition, carries particular irony because Margaret understands that her condition may prove anything but temporary. Laudanum withdrawal can last for weeks, according to Dr. Hartwell's clinical descriptions, and she possesses no resources for managing such extended suffering while maintaining her family and social responsibilities. Charles departs for his banking offices with his usual kiss on Margaret's cheek, the brief physical contact revealing the fever-like temperature fluctuations that accompany her withdrawal symptoms. His familiar scent, normally comforting, now seems overwhelming to her hypersensitive nervous system. The children follow their father's departure with enthusiastic descriptions of the day's planned activities, their voices seeming unnaturally loud in Margaret's heightened auditory awareness. Every sound feels amplified beyond comfortable levels, from the scraping of chair legs against wooden floors to the rustling of newspaper pages. Left alone in the breakfast room, Margaret confronts the mathematical certainty of her situation with crystalline clarity that cuts through her physical discomfort. She possesses no laudanum and no legitimate means of obtaining more. Dr. Thornbury's growing suspicion makes requesting additional prescriptions increasingly dangerous. Alternative supplies exist, but accessing them would require elaborate deceptions that her current condition makes nearly impossible to execute. Most terrifying of all, her withdrawal symptoms will continue intensifying for several more days before beginning their gradual retreat. She must somehow survive this extended period of suffering while maintaining enough functionality to prevent exposure of her condition to family members and household staff, whose discovery would destroy everything she has worked to preserve. The morning hours stretch ahead with their demands for continued performance in her roles as wife, mother, and household manager. Each responsibility requires capabilities that feel increasingly beyond her reach, as laudanum's absence creates chaos in every system of her body and mind. Margaret rises from the breakfast table with movements that require conscious coordination, her legs trembling beneath the weight of petticoats and moral obligation. The day ahead offers no respite from the requirements of Victorian respectability, but neither does it provide any resources for meeting those requirements without the chemical support that has become essential to her functioning. The woman who once believed laudanum would help her become a more capable version of herself must now discover whether any authentic capability remains beneath 3 years of chemical dependency. The answer will emerge through hours of suffering that will test every strategy she has developed for concealing her true condition from those whose judgment could destroy her family's future. As London awakens outside her windows, beginning another day of commerce and social obligation, Margaret prepares to face the greatest challenge of her life without the substance that has made previous challenges seem manageable. The reckoning she has avoided through months of careful supply management can no longer be postponed, and the hours ahead will determine whether her elaborate deceptions can survive the harsh reality of complete chemical withdrawal. The grandfather clock chimes 9 times, marking another hour survived and countless more that must be endured before her ordeal reaches its natural conclusion. But Margaret no longer possesses any certainty about what that conclusion might bring, except the knowledge that she cannot continue existing as she has for the past 3 years. The woman reflected in every mirror throughout the house has become a stranger whose capabilities depend entirely on substances she can no longer obtain. Today will begin the process of discovering who she actually is when stripped of chemical mediation, social performance, and the elaborate construction of respectability that has defined her identity as Victorian lady. The morning light streaming through lace curtains illuminates a life poised at the edge of complete transformation. Though whether that change will bring salvation or destruction remains as uncertain as Margaret's ability to survive the coming hours without the laudanum that has become more essential to her existence than breath itself. The hours crawl by with excruciating slowness as Margaret attempts to navigate the ordinary demands of Victorian domestic life, while her body wages war against itself. By mid-morning, the tremors have intensified to the point where holding a teacup becomes an exercise in concentrated willpower, the delicate china rattling against the saucer like castanets in her unsteady grasp. She retreats to her private sitting room, ostensibly to attend to correspondence, but actually to escape the watchful eyes of servants who have begun to notice her deteriorating condition. The writing desk that once provided refuge for thoughtful letter composition now feels like an instrument of torture as she attempts to pen replies to social invitations with hands that refuse to obey her commands. The ink blots and shaky lettering that emerge from her efforts bear no resemblance to the elegant penmanship that has characterized her correspondence for years. Each stroke of the pen requires enormous concentration, and even then, the results appear as if written by someone in the throes of serious illness. She abandons the task after ruining 3 sheets of expensive stationery. Each failed attempt, a reminder of capabilities that have evaporated along with her chemical support system. Mary enters with tea service, her practiced efficiency masking growing concern about her mistress's condition. The silver tray trembles as she sets it down, not from her own nervousness, but from the vibrations created by Margaret's uncontrollable shaking. The aromatic steam rising from the teapot, normally a comfort, now triggers waves of nausea that force Margaret to press her handkerchief against her mouth. "Shall I send word to Master Charles at the bank?" Mary asks quietly, her professional discretion warring with genuine worry. "Perhaps he should return home to attend you properly." The suggestion terrifies Margaret more than her physical symptoms. Charles's presence would require sustained performance at precisely the moment when such deception becomes impossible. His businessman's eye for detail would detect inconsistencies that her usual explanations could not adequately address. Worse still, his concern might prompt him to summon medical attention that would expose everything she has fought to conceal. "That won't be necessary," Margaret manages through gritted teeth, each word requiring conscious effort to pronounce clearly. "I simply need quiet rest. Please ensure I'm not disturbed until the children return from their lessons." Oh, Mary's reluctant agreement comes with visible reservations, but she understands the hierarchy of domestic authority well enough to follow instructions despite her misgivings. After she departs, Margaret collapses into her reading chair with the relief of someone who has been holding a tremendous weight and finally allowed to set it down. But solitude brings no comfort when your enemy lives inside your own body. Without the distractions of social interaction, Margaret becomes acutely aware of every symptom ravaging her system. Her skin feels like it's been turned inside out, hypersensitive to the touch of fabric that once provided comfort. The room's temperature seems to fluctuate wildly, leaving her alternately shivering beneath heavy shawls and desperately fanning herself as fever-like heat courses through her veins. Time moves with the sluggish pace of honey in winter. Minutes feel like hours as Margaret watches the mantel clock's hands advance with agonizing slowness. Each chime marks another quarter hour survived, but also brings her closer to the children's return, when she must somehow transform back into the capable mother they expect to find waiting for them. The morning light shifts across the room's Persian carpet, creating patterns that seem to writhe and dance in ways that have nothing to do with actual shadows. Margaret's vision blurs intermittently, forcing her to blink rapidly to clear distortions that make familiar objects appear foreign and threatening. The beloved books lining her shelves seem to lean at impossible angles, their gilt lettering swimming like golden fish in an aquatic hallucination. Hunger remains completely absent despite having consumed almost nothing at breakfast. The mere thought of food triggers such violent nausea that Margaret must focus on slow, deliberate breathing to prevent actual vomiting that would be impossible to explain to household staff. Water provides the only tolerable sustenance, but even that simple liquid tastes metallic and strange, as if her body has forgotten how to process the most basic requirements for survival. The sounds of London life continue beyond her windows with cruel normalcy. Horse hooves clatter over cobblestones as merchants make their rounds. Street vendors call out their wares in voices that seem unnaturally amplified to Margaret's hypersensitive hearing. Church bells toll the hour with bronze reverberations that feel like physical blows against her skull. In her more lucid moments, Margaret attempts to formulate plans for obtaining relief from her condition. The obvious solution involves visiting Dr. Thornbury with complaints that would justify renewed laudanum prescriptions, but her appearance makes such deception increasingly dangerous. No respectable physician could examine her current state without recognizing symptoms that extend far beyond simple nervous exhaustion. Alternative medical practitioners exist in London's less fashionable districts, men who ask fewer questions and maintain looser standards about their patients' moral character. But accessing such resources would require elaborate explanations for her absence from home, transportation arrangements that avoid neighborhood observation, and financial transactions that leave no traceable records. Her current physical condition makes executing such complex deceptions nearly impossible. The illegal laudanum trade operates through networks that respectable women are not supposed to know exist. Certain public houses, gambling establishments, and boarding houses serve as distribution points for substances that medical authority has deemed inappropriate for general consumption. Margaret possesses theoretical knowledge of these alternatives through charitable work with unfortunate women, but practical access requires connections and courage that her sheltered existence has never provided. More troubling than the logistics of supply replacement is Margaret's growing recognition that her dependency has progressed beyond simple physical addiction. The laudanum has become the foundation for her entire identity as Victorian wife and mother. Without chemical enhancement, she cannot access the patience, energy, and emotional stability that effective domestic management requires. Her authentic self, whatever that might be, after 3 years of chemical mediation, feels completely inadequate for the responsibilities that define her social existence. The afternoon approaches with its promise of the children's return from their lessons. Edmund and Charlotte will burst through the front door with their usual enthusiasm, full of stories about their educational adventures and playground conflicts that require maternal wisdom for proper resolution. They will expect the kind of engaged attention that validates their importance in her life, while providing guidance for navigating childhood's complex social and emotional challenges. Margaret understands that she cannot provide such parenting while battling withdrawal symptoms that make basic conversation feel overwhelming. Yet disappointing her children carries consequences that extend beyond immediate emotional harm. Edmund and Charlotte serve as witnesses whose observations could expose her condition to Charles if they report unusual maternal behavior during his evening return from business obligations. The sound of familiar voices in the front hallway announces their arrival with the precision of a well-wound chronometer. Margaret forces herself upright in her chair, attempting to arrange her features into expressions of maternal welcome, despite the enormous effort required for such basic social performance. The sitting room door opens to admit two small figures whose innocent expectations feel like crushing weights upon her compromised capabilities. "Mama, look what I learned today," Charlotte exclaims with 8-year-old excitement, brandishing a slate covered with mathematical calculations that represent her afternoon's academic achievements. Her bright eyes search Margaret's face for the praise and engagement that usually greet such scholarly accomplishments. Edmund follows with his own educational trophies, Latin vocabulary words that he recites with careful pronunciation while watching for maternal approval. His earnest desire for recognition creates emotional demands that Margaret's current condition cannot adequately satisfy, though she recognizes that failure to respond appropriately will create confusion and disappointment that could have lasting consequences. "Very impressive, darling," Margaret manages, her voice emerging as a hoarse whisper that bears little resemblance to her usual maternal tones. The words feel disconnected from any genuine emotional response, delivered through sheer force of will rather than authentic pride in her children's accomplishments. Both children notice the change immediately, with the sharp observational skills that make them such effective detectors of adult distress. Charlotte tilts her head with the curious expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle, while Edmund's brow furrows with concern that seems far too mature for his 8 years. "Are you quite ill, Mama?" Edmund asks with the careful politeness of a child who has been taught to show proper concern for adult welfare. "You sound rather strange, and you're shaking like the leaves outside when the wind blows hard." The comparison to autumn foliage provides an unfortunately accurate description of Margaret's uncontrollable tremors. Her hands flutter against her skirts with involuntary movements that no amount of conscious effort can completely suppress. The children's innocent observations cut through her attempts at concealment with devastating precision. "Just a touch of fatigue, my dears," she replies while attempting to still her trembling hands through sheer willpower. "Perhaps you could play quietly in the nursery while Mama rests a bit longer." The suggestion disappoints them visibly, but their training in proper behavior toward indisposed adults prevents open protests. They retreat with obvious reluctance, leaving Margaret alone with the knowledge that her maternal failures are accumulating with each interaction that falls short of their reasonable expectations for engaged parenting. The afternoon stretches endlessly as Margaret alternates between periods of restless agitation and exhausted collapse. Sleep remains impossible despite her body's desperate need for rest, because withdrawal symptoms create a state of hyper-alertness that makes relaxation unattainable. Her mind races with chaotic thoughts that jump between practical concerns about supply replacement and deeper questions about the authentic self that might exist beneath 3 years of chemical dependency. The grandfather clock chimes 4 times, marking another hour survived in what feels like an endless endurance test. Each passing minute brings her closer to Charles's evening return, when she must somehow transform into the competent wife whose domestic management skills justify his confidence in their household arrangements. Evening meals require orchestrating complex service coordination, while participating in family conversations about the day's events. Charles will expect updates about social obligations, household expenditures, and domestic staff performance. The children will need guidance about tomorrow's lessons and resolution of any conflicts that arose during their afternoon activities. Most challenging of all, Margaret must accomplish these family leadership responsibilities while battling symptoms that make sustained attention nearly impossible. The laudanum absence has created cognitive fog that prevents her from processing complex information or making decisions that require consideration of multiple variables simultaneously. Mrs. Caldwell appears with questions about tomorrow's marketing needs and staff assignments. Her professional efficiency, assuming that Margaret will provide the clear direction that household management requires. But simple decisions about menu planning and budget allocation feel overwhelming when filtered through withdrawal symptoms that distort her ability to evaluate priorities and consequences. Perhaps we should serve yesterday's remaining roast as cold cuts for tomorrow's luncheon, the housekeeper suggests tactfully, after observing Margaret's unusual hesitation about routine domestic choices. That would reduce the marketing requirements and simplify the kitchen preparations. The recommendation provides welcome relief from decision-making demands, while also highlighting how obviously Margaret's capabilities have deteriorated. Mrs. Caldwell's diplomatic accommodation suggests growing awareness that something fundamental has changed in her mistress's ability to manage normal household responsibilities. Yes, that sounds perfectly reasonable. Margaret agrees with gratitude that extends beyond the specific suggestion to include the housekeeper's tactful handling of her obvious limitations. Please proceed with whatever arrangements seem most practical for the staff's convenience. The delegation represents both necessary adaptation to her current condition and dangerous precedent that could attract unwanted attention from Charles if he notices that household management decisions are being made by staff rather than his wife. Victorian husbands expect their domestic arrangements to flow from female oversight, not servant initiative, regardless of the practical effectiveness of such delegation. As evening approaches with its promise of family dinner and required social performance, Margaret faces the prospect of her most challenging deception. Yet, she must appear at the dining table looking fresh and capable. Despite having spent the day battling symptoms that have grown progressively worse, Charles and the children will expect the kind of engaging conversation and attentive presence that defines successful family interaction in their social class. The elaborate process of evening dress preparation begins with Mary's assistance. Though both women understand, they are attempting to create an illusion that may prove impossible to maintain. The elegant gown and careful grooming can conceal many symptoms, but they cannot restore the cognitive clarity and emotional stability that effective family leadership requires. Margaret studies her reflection in the dressing table mirror with the detached fascination of someone observing a stranger. The woman staring back possesses all the external markers of Victorian respectability, but her eyes reveal a desperation that no amount of cosmetic artistry can completely disguise. She has become expert at wearing the costume of normalcy while being anything but normal beneath its carefully constructed surface. The dinner bell chimes downstairs, summoning the family to their evening meal with the same punctuality that has governed their domestic routines for 8 years. But tonight, that familiar sound carries the weight of ultimate test for Margaret's ability to maintain deceptions that have become increasingly difficult to sustain. She descends the staircase with careful deliberation, gripping the banister with desperate intensity while projecting the graceful confidence that family dinner requires. Each step downward brings her closer to a performance that will determine whether her elaborate construction of chemical dependency and social respectability can survive another day of increasing strain. The dining room awaits with its familiar comforts and crushing expectations, where she must somehow transform from invalid into wife and mother, through sheer force of will and 3 years of practice at concealing the most shameful secret of her carefully regulated existence. The dining room's warm gaslight casts deceptive comfort across familiar surroundings that now feel like a stage set for Margaret's most demanding performance. Charles sits at his customary place, unfolding his evening newspaper with the satisfied air of a man whose day concluded profitably. The children arrange themselves with practiced precision, their faces bright with anticipation for the family conversations that punctuate their evening routine. Margaret takes her seat with movements calculated to appear natural, despite the tremendous effort required for each gesture. Her hands find refuge in her lap, hidden beneath the tablecloth where their violent trembling cannot betray her condition. The elaborate place setting before her seems to mock her incapacity, each piece of silverware representing another challenge to her deteriorating motor control. "You look rather improved this evening, my dear," Charles observes with the casual attention of someone whose concern has been satisfied by surface appearances. "I trust the afternoon's rest proved beneficial for whatever malady was troubling you." His words carry the comfortable assumption that Margaret's mysterious illness has resolved itself through proper feminine recuperation. Victorian gentlemen possess limited patience for prolonged female indisposition, expecting their wives to recover promptly from whatever delicate conditions might temporarily impair their domestic efficiency. "Yes, much better," Margaret replies, amazed that her voice emerges without obvious tremor, despite the enormous concentration required for speech control. Simply a touch of nervous exhaustion that rest has largely remedied. The explanation satisfies Charles's mild curiosity, while establishing expectations for renewed domestic competence that Margaret knows she cannot fulfill. But maintaining this fiction feels less important than surviving the next hour without exposing symptoms that would raise questions beyond her ability to answer convincingly. Cook's first course arrives with its usual presentation of seasonal soup, served in delicate china bowls that require steady hands for graceful consumption. Margaret stares at the golden liquid with growing dread, understanding that eating represents another test of capabilities that laudanum withdrawal has severely compromised. Edmund launches into enthusiastic descriptions of his afternoon mathematics lesson, his young voice carrying across the dining room with energy that seems unnaturally amplified to Margaret's hypersensitive hearing. Each word strikes her consciousness with painful clarity, while demanding maternal responses that require mental processing she can barely manage. "Master Harrison says I'm progressing remarkably well with algebraic concepts," Edmund continues with obvious pride. "He believes I might advance to more sophisticated mathematical principles next term if I maintain current study habits." The academic achievement deserves genuine maternal celebration, but Margaret finds herself struggling to access appropriate emotional responses through the fog of withdrawal symptoms. Her pride in Edmund's accomplishments feels filtered through layers of chemical absence that prevent authentic connection with his success. "That's wonderful, darling," she manages while attempting to lift her spoon with hands that shake like autumn leaves. "Your father and I are very proud of your dedication to scholarly excellence." Charles beams with paternal satisfaction that assumes Margaret's response reflects genuine engagement rather than desperate performance. His confidence in their family's educational progress creates additional pressure for sustained attention that her current condition makes nearly impossible to provide. Charlotte contributes her own academic updates with 8-year-old enthusiasm that demands equal maternal recognition. Her recitation of French vocabulary words requires corrections and encouragement that test Margaret's ability to access knowledge through withdrawal-induced cognitive impairment. The simple act of consuming soup becomes an elaborate choreography of concealment as Margaret attempts to navigate liquid to her mouth without revealing the tremors that make every gesture unpredictable. She manages small sips between conversational contributions, grateful that the warm broth provides some relief for her increasingly sensitive digestive system. Mrs. Pemberton inquired about our Christmas entertaining plans during her afternoon visit, Charles mentions, while cutting his meat with practiced precision. "I assured her that you would coordinate the usual holiday gatherings with your customary excellence." The casual reference to future social obligations strikes terror into Margaret's already racing heart. Christmas entertaining requires weeks of advanced planning, sustained energy for elaborate preparations, and the kind of gracious hostess performance that her current condition makes unthinkable. Yet refusing such traditional responsibilities would create exactly the kind of speculation she desperately needs to avoid. "Certainly," she agrees with false confidence, while privately calculating whether she will survive the next week, much less manage holiday celebrations that assume capabilities she no longer possesses. "I'll begin coordinating arrangements once this temporary indisposition completely resolves." The temporal qualifier provides potential escape from commitments that may prove impossible to fulfill, but it also establishes expectations for rapid recovery that could become problematic if her withdrawal symptoms persist, as long as medical literature suggests they might. Mary appears to clear the soup course, her trained eyes noting the barely touched bowl that reveals Margaret's inability to consume normal portions. The maid's expression carries subtle concern that goes beyond professional attention to proper service, suggesting growing awareness that her mistress's condition extends beyond simple temporary illness. The meat course presents even greater challenges as Charles carves the roast with ceremonial precision that demonstrates his role as family patriarch. The rich aromas that once stimulated appetite now trigger waves of nausea that force Margaret to breathe carefully through her mouth to prevent visible retching. "I encountered Harrison Whitfield at the club today," Charles continues with the comfortable rhythm of someone sharing his day's experiences with interested family members. "He mentioned certain investment opportunities in South African mining ventures that merit serious consideration." Financial discussions require Margaret to appear knowledgeable about household economics while battling cognitive fog that makes processing complex information nearly impossible. She nods at appropriate intervals while privately focusing all her energy on preventing her wine glass from slipping through trembling fingers. The children's chatter creates a constant background of noise that feels overwhelming to Margaret's hypersensitive nervous system. Every laugh seems too loud, every question demands more mental energy than she possesses, and every expectation for maternal guidance weighs like physical pressure against her compromised capabilities. "Mama seems rather quiet tonight," Charlotte observes with the direct honesty that makes children such effective detectors of adult distress. "Are you quite certain you're feeling better? You haven't eaten very much, and you keep staring at your plate rather strangely." The innocent observation cuts through Margaret's careful facade with devastating accuracy. Charlotte's comment draws attention to behavioral changes that Margaret hoped would pass unnoticed, creating exactly the kind of family scrutiny that could lead to unwanted medical intervention. "Just thoughtful about tomorrow's responsibilities, darling," Margaret replies, while attempting to take a bite of meat that tastes like sawdust in her mouth. Sometimes adult concerns require considerable mental attention that might appear distracted to young observers. The explanation satisfies Charlotte's curiosity, while deflecting attention from symptoms that grow more difficult to conceal with each passing hour. But Margaret recognizes that her window for maintaining these deceptions continues shrinking, as withdrawal effects intensify beyond her ability to manage through willpower alone. Charles discusses his banking colleagues with enthusiasm that assumes Margaret's continued interest in his professional advancement. His descriptions of office politics and financial strategies require engaged responses that demonstrate wifely support for his career ambitions. But her capacity for such sustained attention feels frustratingly elusive. The dining room's gaslight flickers slightly, creating shadows that seem to dance with unnatural movement in Margaret's distorted peripheral vision. The familiar room appears foreign and threatening, as withdrawal symptoms affect her visual processing in ways that make even comfortable surroundings seem alien and dangerous. Edmund asks for guidance about a playground dispute that requires diplomatic maternal wisdom for proper resolution. His earnest request for adult intervention in childhood conflicts normally would engage Margaret's protective instincts, but her current condition makes providing nuanced parenting advice feel overwhelming. "Perhaps you could discuss your concerns with your father," she suggests, with guilt that compounds her existing distress. He possesses excellent judgment about handling interpersonal difficulties with classmates. The delegation disappoints Edmund visibly, while also creating potential complications if Charles notices that his wife is avoiding traditional maternal responsibilities. Victorian fathers expect their wives to manage children's emotional needs, while they focus on financial and disciplinary matters that require masculine authority. Dessert service brings relief that the meal approaches its conclusion, though Margaret understands that surviving dinner represents only one challenge in an evening that will test every strategy she has developed for concealing her true condition. After dinner family time requires sustained engagement with domestic responsibilities that assume capabilities she no longer possesses. The children's bedtime routines demand maternal oversight of washing, prayers, and story reading that provide essential emotional security for their developing sense of family stability. Margaret must somehow transform from invalid into nurturing mother through sheer force of will and years of practice at performing roles. Her authentic self can no longer fulfill. Charles expects post-dinner conversation about household matters, social obligations, and intimate partnership that defines successful Victorian marriage. His anticipation of continued domestic competence assumes that Margaret's afternoon indisposition has resolved itself sufficiently to restore normal marital interaction. But the woman sitting at the dining table bears only superficial resemblance to the capable wife and mother whose identity has been constructed around chemical enhancement of her natural abilities. Without laudanum's support, Margaret feels like an actress playing roles she no longer understands, delivering lines that feel disconnected from any authentic emotional experience. The grandfather clock chimes 8 times, marking another hour survived in what feels like an endless endurance test of deception and performance. Each passing minute brings new challenges that require resources she no longer possesses, forcing her to discover whether 3 years of chemical dependency have left any genuine capabilities intact beneath the elaborate construction of pharmaceutical assistance. As the family prepares to transition from dining room to drawing room for evening activities that assume continued maternal participation, Margaret faces the prospect of extended social performance, while battling symptoms that grow more severe with each passing hour. The evening stretches ahead with its demands for sustained family leadership, at precisely the moment when such responsibilities feel most impossible to fulfill. The woman who once took laudanum to enhance her capabilities as Victorian wife and mother must now confront the terrifying possibility that those capabilities exist only through chemical mediation. Tonight, we'll test whether any authentic strength remains beneath 3 years of dependency that has transformed medicine into the foundation for her entire social existence. Rising from the dinner table requires conscious coordination of movements that once flowed automatically, each gesture demanding deliberate control over limbs that no longer obey her conscious commands reliably. Margaret grips her chair back with desperate intensity, while projecting the graceful confidence that family evening activities require. The drawing room awaits with its comfortable furniture and crushing expectations, where she must somehow maintain the illusion of domestic competence, while her body wages increasingly desperate war against the absence of substances that have become more essential to her functioning than food, sleep, or honest human connection. The evening light fades outside the windows as London settles into nighttime routines that assume the continuation of normal family life within the Whitmore household. But Margaret understands that nothing about her existence remains normal, and the hours ahead will determine whether her elaborate deceptions can survive the harsh reality of complete chemical withdrawal, combined with unrelenting social obligations. The parlour's familiar warmth feels simultaneously comforting and threatening as Margaret settles into her customary chair near the fireplace, its upholstered arms providing necessary support for her increasingly unreliable physical coordination. Charles arranges himself with his evening pipe and financial journals, while the children spread their books across the Persian carpet for the quiet study time that precedes their bedtime routines. This domestic tableau represents everything Margaret once cherished about her role as wife and mother. The peaceful evening hours when her family gathered in comfortable intimacy, sharing the day's experiences while preparing for tomorrow's challenges. Such moments had provided genuine satisfaction before laudanum transformed her authentic engagement into chemical performance that grows more difficult to maintain with each passing hour. Edmund struggles with Latin conjugations that require maternal assistance, his young brow furrowed with concentration as he attempts to master declensions that seem designed to confuse rather than educate. His frustrated sighs create emotional demands for encouraging guidance that Margaret recognizes she should provide. But accessing patience and pedagogical wisdom through withdrawal symptoms feels nearly impossible. "Mama, could you help me understand why these word endings change so drastically?" he asks, with the trusting expectation that maternal knowledge will resolve his academic confusion. Master Harrison's explanations make sense during lessons, but reviewing them alone proves rather challenging. The request represents exactly the kind of intellectual partnership that effective parenting requires, but Margaret's compromised cognitive state makes processing complex grammatical concepts feel overwhelming. The Latin rules that once seemed straightforward now blur together in confusion that mirrors her internal chaos. "Perhaps we could review your lesson materials together after your sister completes her reading assignment," she suggests with hope that delayed assistance might prove more manageable than immediate tutoring. Sometimes concepts become clearer when approached with fresh attention rather than forced understanding. Edmund accepts this postponement with visible disappointment that adds guilt to Margaret's existing emotional burden. Her son deserves the kind of engaged academic support that his educational progress requires, but providing such assistance demands mental clarity that laudanum withdrawal has temporarily eliminated. Charlotte curls in her favorite corner with a storybook whose illustrations capture her complete attention, her young imagination transported to fictional worlds that seem more appealing than the increasingly tense domestic reality surrounding her. Her peaceful absorption provides temporary relief from maternal demands, while also highlighting the stark contrast between childhood innocence and adult complexity. Charles discusses his banking concerns with the comfortable assumption that Margaret will provide interested responses to his professional observations. His descriptions of currency fluctuations and investment strategies require the kind of sophisticated economic understanding that their marriage has always assumed she possesses through intelligent wifely engagement. The South African mining ventures. Harrison mentioned present intriguing possibilities, he continues, while tamping tobacco into his pipe bowl. Initial capital requirements seem reasonable considering potential returns, though political stability remains somewhat uncertain given colonial developments. Financial discussions that once stimulated Margaret's intellectual curiosity now feel like foreign languages requiring translation she cannot provide. The economic concepts float past her compromised consciousness without engaging genuine understanding or generating meaningful responses that Charles's confidence in her judgment assumes she can offer. Such decisions require careful consideration of multiple variables. She manages while hoping that generic wisdom might substitute for specific analysis. Her current condition makes impossible. Perhaps additional research would clarify whether potential benefits justify inherent risks. The response satisfies Charles's need for wifely consultation, while avoiding commitments to detailed economic evaluation that her withdrawal symptoms make unthinkable. But such diplomatic evasions establish patterns of intellectual disengagement that could become problematic if her condition persists beyond the temporary indisposition she has claimed. The fire crackles in the hearth with sounds that seem unnaturally amplified to Margaret's hypersensitive hearing, each spark and ember creating auditory assaults that feel like physical blows against her skull. The room's comfortable warmth fluctuates unpredictably in her perception, leaving her alternately shivering beneath heavy shawls and desperately fanning herself with the delicate ivory fan that has become essential equipment for managing temperature dysregulation. Mary appears with tea service, her efficient movements suggesting routine domestic normalcy, while her concerned glances toward Margaret reveal growing awareness that something fundamental has changed in the household's evening rhythms. The silver tray trembles slightly as she arranges cups and saucers, though whether from her own nervousness or vibrations created by Margaret's uncontrollable shaking remains unclear. The aromatic steam rising from the teapot triggers immediate nausea that forces Margaret to press her handkerchief against her mouth, with movements she hopes appear related to delicate feminine sensibilities, rather than desperate attempts to prevent visible retching. Tea service represents another test of social capabilities that withdrawal symptoms have severely compromised. "Shall I prepare the children's bedtime preparations, ma'am?" Mary asks with tactful attention to household routines that assume Margaret will provide supervisory oversight for evening rituals that ensure proper childhood development through consistent parental engagement. The suggestion offers welcome relief from immediate performance demands, while also highlighting how obviously Margaret's maternal capabilities have deteriorated throughout the day. Her inability to manage basic parenting responsibilities without staff assistance represents dangerous precedent that could attract unwanted attention from Charles if he recognizes that childcare decisions are being made by servants rather than their mother. "Yes, that would be helpful," Margaret agrees with gratitude that extends beyond specific assistance to include Mary's diplomatic handling of her obvious limitations. "Please ensure they complete their washing thoroughly and say proper prayers before sleep." Charlotte approaches with her completed reading assignment, seeking maternal approval for academic accomplishments that deserve genuine celebration, rather than the hollow praise that Margaret's current condition allows her to provide. The child's bright expectation for engaged parental response creates emotional demands that feel overwhelming, despite their fundamental importance for healthy development. "I finished the entire story about the princess who rescued herself from the tower," Charlotte announces with 8-year-old pride that assumes maternal interest will match her own enthusiasm for fictional heroines who demonstrate feminine capability and independence. The irony of Charlotte's story selection strikes Margaret with painful awareness of her own imprisonment in chemical dependency that has transformed her from capable woman into someone whose existence revolves around substances she can no longer obtain. The fictional princess's self-rescue seems impossibly remote from Margaret's reality of increasing helplessness. "How wonderful, darling," she responds, while attempting to access genuine maternal pride through layers of withdrawal symptoms that create barriers between intention and authentic emotional expression. Such stories demonstrate that intelligence and determination often prove more valuable than waiting for external rescue. The moral lesson emerges from some surviving fragment of her authentic self, though delivering it requires enormous effort that leaves Margaret feeling drained by the simple act of providing appropriate maternal guidance. Every interaction with her children demands resources she no longer possesses, while highlighting the growing gap between their needs and her capabilities. Edmund finally conquers his Latin exercises with assistance from Charles, who demonstrates the kind of patient tutorial engagement that effective parenting requires. His success creates demands for maternal recognition that Margaret struggles to provide through cognitive fog that makes processing his academic achievement feel nearly impossible. The children's bedtime preparations proceed with Mary's supervision, while Margaret remains in her chair, ostensibly reviewing household accounts, but actually focusing all her energy on maintaining enough composure to bid them proper good night when they return for final maternal blessing before sleep. Their reappearance in nightgowns and slippers creates the evening's most challenging performance requirement, as both children seek the kind of nurturing attention that provides essential emotional security for childhood development. Edmund's request for story reading and Charlotte's need for bedtime prayers demand sustained maternal engagement that feels completely beyond Margaret's current capabilities. "Perhaps Papa could provide tonight's story," Margaret suggests, with guilt that compounds her existing distress about failing to meet her children's reasonable expectations for consistent parental attention. "I'm feeling rather tired this evening and fear I might not do justice to proper narrative presentation." The disappointment in their faces reveals how significantly her withdrawal from maternal duties has affected their sense of family stability. Children depend on predictable parental involvement for emotional security, and Margaret's increasing inability to provide such consistency creates confusion that could have lasting psychological consequences. Charles steps into the parental breach with good-natured efficiency that masks his growing concern about Margaret's unusual disengagement from family responsibilities. His willingness to assume additional childcare duties provides necessary relief while also establishing precedent for altered domestic arrangements that could become problematic if her condition persists. After the children's departure for sleep, the drawing room settles into intimate quiet that assumes renewed marital connection between husband and wife, whose evening conversations traditionally provide essential communication about family concerns and personal observations. Charles expects the kind of engaged partnership that defines successful Victorian marriage, but Margaret feels like an imposter wearing his wife's clothing, while lacking any of her authentic capabilities for genuine human connection. The laudanum absence has created emotional barriers that prevent her from accessing the warmth, intelligence, and companionship that their relationship has always assumed she would provide through natural wifely affection. "You seem rather distant this evening, my dear," Charles observes with gentle concern that reflects genuine worry rather than critical judgment. "I trust this afternoon's indisposition hasn't developed into something more serious that might require medical attention." The suggestion of doctor involvement strikes terror into Margaret's already racing heart, because professional medical examination would reveal symptoms that could not be explained by any respectable illness. Her condition would expose the chemical dependency she has fought so desperately to conceal, destroying not only her reputation, but Charles's business prospects and their children's social futures. "Simply lingering fatigue that proper rest will resolve completely," she replies with false confidence, while privately recognizing that her withdrawal symptoms will likely intensify over the coming days before beginning any gradual improvement. Nothing that warrants medical intervention for such temporary discomfort. Charles accepts her explanation, with the trusting assumption that his wife possesses sufficient self-knowledge to evaluate her own health accurately. His masculine discomfort with feminine medical mysteries makes him reluctant to press concerns that might venture into territory better left to female discretion and professional medical authority. The evening's final challenge arrives as Charles prepares for their private marital moments that Victorian couples conduct behind closed doors, with discretion that protects intimate partnership from public observation. He expects the kind of physical and emotional availability that defines successful matrimonial relationships. Margaret recognizes that her current condition makes such intimate connection impossible, without revealing symptoms that would raise questions beyond her ability to answer. Convincingly, the withdrawal effects have created hypersensitivity that makes even gentle touch feel painful, while emotional barriers prevent authentic response to physical affection. "Perhaps we might postpone intimate conversation until I've recovered more completely from today's malaise," she suggests, with hope that delayed expectations might prove more manageable than immediate performance demands. "I fear I'm not quite myself this evening and would prefer to wait until I can provide proper wifely attention." The postponement disappoints Charles visibly, while also creating potential complications if Margaret's condition prevents normal marital relations for the extended period that withdrawal symptoms typically require. Victorian husbands possess limited patience for prolonged feminine indisposition that interferes with established matrimonial expectations. As the household settles into nighttime quiet, Margaret faces the prospect of attempting sleep while battling symptoms that make rest impossible, despite her body's desperate need for recuperation. The darkness brings no relief from withdrawal effects that intensify during hours when chemical absence becomes most apparent to nervous systems accustomed to regular pharmaceutical support. The bedroom that once provided refuge from daily pressures now feels like a prison where she must endure hours of increasing discomfort while maintaining enough composure to avoid attracting attention from Charles, whose proximity makes concealing her condition exponentially more difficult. Margaret lies motionless beside her sleeping husband while her body wages increasingly desperate war against laudanum absence. Every nerve ending screaming in rebellion against the chemical void that has replaced 3 years of pharmaceutical dependence. The night stretches endlessly ahead, with promises of sleeplessness and escalating symptoms that will test every strategy she has developed for maintaining deceptions that grow more precarious with each passing hour. Tomorrow will bring renewed demands for domestic competence and social performance, while her withdrawal symptoms reach their peak intensity, forcing her to discover whether any authentic strength remains beneath the elaborate construction of chemical dependency that has defined her existence as Victorian wife and mother. The woman who once believed laudanum would enhance her capabilities must now confront the terrifying possibility that those capabilities exist only through pharmaceutical mediation, leaving her to face life's challenges with resources she can no longer access through substances that have become more essential to her functioning than consciousness itself. The grandfather clock strikes 2 in the morning, each chime reverberating through Margaret's skull like hammer blows against an anvil. Sleep remains a cruel impossibility as her nervous system rebels with increasing violence against the chemical void that has replaced 3 years of pharmaceutical dependence. Every position becomes unbearable within minutes, her hypersensitive skin reacting to the finest linen sheets as if they were woven from nettles and thorns. Charles sleeps peacefully beside her, his steady breathing a maddening reminder of the normal rest that her body can no longer achieve. She envies his unconscious tranquility while simultaneously fearing that her violent tremors might wake him and force explanations she cannot provide. The elaborate performance of marital normalcy requires even her suffering to remain silent and invisible. The darkness transforms familiar bedroom objects into threatening shapes that seem to shift and writhe in her peripheral vision. The wardrobe looms like a giant coffin, while the dressing table mirror reflects distorted images that bear no resemblance to the woman she once knew herself to be. Even closing her eyes provides no escape, as vivid hallucinations play behind her eyelids with the intensity of fever dreams. Her skin alternates between burning fever and bone-deep chills that no amount of blankets can warm. Perspiration soaks through her nightgown despite the room's cool temperature, while her hands and feet feel like blocks of ice that will never regain circulation. The chemical withdrawal has created chaos in every system of her body, turning basic physiological functions into sources of torment. By 4 o'clock, Margaret abandons any pretense of sleep and retreats to her sitting room, where she can pace frantically without disturbing Charles's rest. The Persian carpet muffles her footsteps as she walks endless circuits around furniture that seems to mock her with its stability and permanence. Everything in her world has become unreliable, except the relentless progression of symptoms that grow worse with each passing hour. The morning sun creeps through heavy curtains with the inevitability of execution, bringing another day of responsibilities that feel impossible to fulfill. Margaret stares at her reflection in the sitting room mirror and sees a stranger whose hollow eyes speak of battles being fought and lost behind a facade of Victorian respectability. The woman looking back has become expert at wearing the costume of normalcy, while being anything but normal beneath its carefully maintained surface. Mary's gentle knock arrives with clockwork precision, announcing the beginning of another day's elaborate deception. Margaret forces herself to respond with something resembling her usual voice, though the sound emerges as a hoarse whisper that bears no resemblance to the cultured tones her lady's maid expects to hear. The morning ablutions become exercises in controlled terror as Margaret attempts to wash and dress while her hands shake so violently that holding a washcloth requires enormous concentration. Mary's increasingly worried expressions reveal that even the most diplomatic servant cannot ignore symptoms that grow more obvious with each interaction. "Perhaps I should prepare a lighter breakfast this morning, ma'am," Mary suggests, with the careful neutrality of someone walking through a minefield of social propriety, something that might be easier on a delicate constitution during recovery from yesterday's malaise. The euphemism provides face-saving explanation for Margaret's obvious inability to consume normal portions, but it also establishes expectations for continued illness that could become problematic if her condition persists for the weeks that medical literature suggests laudanum withdrawal typically requires. Breakfast presents the same torturous challenges as yesterday, but intensified by another night without chemical support, and Charles's growing attention to behavioral changes that no amount of careful performance can completely disguise. His businessman's eye for detail has begun noticing inconsistencies that her usual explanations struggle to address convincingly. "I think perhaps we should summon Dr. Thornbury," Charles announces with the decisive authority of someone accustomed to solving problems through direct action. This lingering indisposition seems rather more serious than simple nervous exhaustion, and professional medical attention might prevent whatever condition you're experiencing from developing into something genuinely dangerous. The words strike Margaret with the force of a physical blow, because Dr. Thornbury's examination would expose everything she has fought so desperately to conceal. His medical training would recognize withdrawal symptoms immediately, leading to questions about medication use that would destroy not only her reputation, but the carefully constructed foundation of their entire family's social standing. "I'm certain that's unnecessary," she manages through gritted teeth, while attempting to steady her coffee cup with hands that refuse to cooperate. These feminine complaints often resolve themselves through proper rest and moderate activity, rather than medical intervention. But Charles's expression reveals growing skepticism about her self-diagnosis, and Margaret realizes that her window for maintaining this deception may be measured in hours rather than days. The elaborate performance that once seemed sustainable has become impossible to continue without the chemical support that transformed her from invalid into accomplished Victorian lady. The morning stretches endlessly as Margaret attempts to navigate household responsibilities while battling symptoms that make basic concentration nearly impossible. Every decision requires enormous mental effort, from selecting menus to approving expenditures, while Mrs. Caldwell's increasingly frequent suggestions reveal that even the household staff recognizes her deteriorating capabilities. By noon, Margaret understands that she faces a choice between two equally terrifying alternatives. She can confess her dependency to Charles and face the social destruction that such revelation would inevitably bring, or she can attempt to obtain laudanum through means that would compromise every moral principle she once held sacred. The illegal trade in pharmaceutical substances operates through networks that respectable women are never supposed to acknowledge, much less access. But Margaret's desperation has reached levels that make previously unthinkable options seem like reasonable solutions to problems that conventional approaches cannot address. The afternoon brings her to a decision that would have horrified the woman she was 3 years ago. Disguised in her plainest dress and darkest veil, Margaret ventures into London's less fashionable districts, where moral boundaries blur and substances flow to anyone willing to pay the asking price. The boarding house on Drury Lane looks innocuous enough from the outside, its peeling paint and grimy windows indistinguishable from dozens of other establishments that cater to London's working classes. But Margaret knows from her charitable work that certain rooms within serve purposes that have nothing to do with providing temporary accommodation for honest labourers. Her knock on the back door produces a suspicious face that evaluates her appearance with the practiced assessment of someone accustomed to unusual requests from unexpected visitors. Money changes hands with efficiency that suggests well-established procedures for serving customers whose needs extend beyond legal pharmaceutical options. The brown bottle she receives contains liquid that looks identical to the laudanum prescribed by Dr. Thornbury, but its provenance makes it infinitely more dangerous to her reputation and social standing. Purchasing medicine through illegal channels transforms her from respectable patient into criminal participant in trade networks that Victorian society views with moral horror. But as Margaret measures her first dose in 3 days, such concerns feel trivial compared to the immediate relief that floods through her tortured nervous system. The familiar bitter taste brings blessed cessation of symptoms that had pushed her beyond the limits of human endurance. Within minutes, the tremors subside, the nausea recedes, and the crushing weight of reality lifts enough to make continued existence seem possible. The transformation is so complete that Margaret almost weeps with gratitude for the chemical salvation that restores her ability to function as wife, mother, and Victorian lady. But even as relief washes over her, she recognizes that this solution creates new problems that may prove more dangerous than the withdrawal symptoms it temporarily resolves. Her supplier operates outside legal medical authority, making future access dependent on criminal connections that could expose her to blackmail, arrest, or worse. The quality and potency of illegal laudanum varies unpredictably, creating risks of accidental overdose or inadequate relief that legitimate medical practice would never allow. Most troubling of all, Margaret realizes that her dependency has progressed beyond simple physical addiction to encompass complete reliance on substances that she must now obtain through means that violate every moral principle her social class holds sacred. The respectable woman who once took prescribed medicine to enhance her domestic capabilities has become someone whose existence depends on criminal transactions in London's most dangerous neighborhoods. Returning home with her precious supply, Margaret resumes her roles as wife and mother with the fluid grace that chemical support makes possible. Charles notices her improved appearance immediately, his relief at her apparent recovery masking any questions about the miraculous speed of her transformation from invalid to accomplished hostess. The children greet her renewed attention with enthusiasm that breaks Margaret's heart, because she understands that their mother's love now depends entirely on her ability to maintain access to substances that exist outside every legal and moral boundary their society recognizes. Their innocent trust in maternal stability rests on foundations built from criminal activity and pharmaceutical dependency. Evening dinner proceeds with the elegant normalcy that laudanum makes possible, but Margaret's awareness of the illegal source supporting her performance adds new dimensions of guilt and fear to the elaborate deception she must maintain. Every gracious gesture, every intelligent conversation, and every demonstration of domestic competence now represents the fruits of criminal enterprise that could destroy everything she has worked to preserve. As London settles into nighttime quiet outside her windows, Margaret counts the doses remaining in her illegally obtained supply and calculates how long she can maintain her restored functionality before facing another crisis of chemical absence. The mathematics of addiction admit no negotiation, and her dependency will require increasingly frequent transactions with criminal networks that grow more dangerous with each contact. The woman who began taking laudanum to become a better version of herself has discovered that such improvement demands constant compromise of the moral principles that once defined her character. Each dose restores her capabilities while simultaneously destroying her authentic self beneath layers of chemical dependency and criminal complicity. But tonight, with laudanum flowing through her veins and her family safely unaware of the price she pays for their domestic tranquility, Margaret allows herself to experience the temporary peace that makes continued existence possible. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and renewed demands for the chemical support that has become more essential to her functioning than honesty, morality, or genuine human connection. The grandfather clock chimes midnight as Margaret prepares for sleep that laudanum will finally allow, though she understands that rest brings her closer to the next crisis of supply and the increasingly desperate measures such crises will demand. The Victorian woman who once believed medicine would enhance her life has learned that some enhancements become prisons from which escape grows more impossible with each passing day. And there, in the amber glow of gaslight filtering through London's perpetual fog, we leave Margaret Whitmore clutching her illegal salvation while the grandfather clock marks another midnight in her carefully constructed hell. What began as a physician's prescription for postpartum headaches had transformed into a criminal enterprise that would define every breath, every social interaction, and every moment of maternal love for the rest of her existence. Margaret's story isn't just about one woman's descent into dependency. It's about an entire generation of Victorian ladies who found themselves trapped in a system that promised relief, but delivered only deeper suffering. These women, constrained by social expectations they could never hope to meet without chemical assistance, became unwitting casualties of a medical establishment that prescribed opium as casually as we might recommend aspirin today. The true horror isn't just the physical withdrawal or even the elaborate deceptions required to maintain respectability. It's the gradual erosion of authentic self beneath layers of pharmaceutical performance, until the woman taking laudanum to become a better version of herself discovers that no authentic version remains to recover tonight. As Margaret drifts into laudanum-assisted sleep, while London's criminal networks profit from her desperation, we're reminded that the line between medicine and poison often depends not on the substance itself, but on the society that creates the conditions requiring such desperate solutions. The Victorian woman who sought chemical enhancement of her natural capabilities learned too late that some improvements become the very chains that prevent us from discovering who we might have been without them. In the end, Margaret's midnight salvation represents not victory, but surrender to forces that had been carefully designed to capture women exactly like her. The prescription that promised to make her a better wife and mother had succeeded beyond Dr. Thornbury's wildest imagination, creating someone whose entire existence now revolved around obtaining the very medicine that had stolen her life one measured dose at a time.